This is Demon Marked, Book 1 of the Venandi Chronicles, an urban paranormal romance series. Written by Sara Snow. Narrated by Selena Salcido and Henry Shader for Hot Ghost Productions. Chapter 12. Georgia. I joined the Vanandi for dinner in a room that looked like it was straight out of the Middle Ages, with an endless table lined with steaming plates and glasses of wine. The hearty food, rack of lamb, roasted potatoes, and a thick vegetable soup warmed my belly. I had eaten better in the last 24 hours at the training center than I had in the past year. Candlelight from the wall sconces shed a subtle glow over the table. I sipped red wine and giggled at Olympia's stories about her romantic conquests. It turned out she really was a witch, especially when it came to men. She had spells for all kinds of male troubles, from infidelity to erectile dysfunction. Viagra is nothing compared to my recipe for limp dick salve, she boasted. I'm thinking about selling the formula to Pfizer and retiring on the proceeds. Of course, sometimes I get the recipe wrong, and it's too potent. One night, I rubbed some of the extra strength formula on a guy, and he ended up with a hard-on that lasted for 3 days.
I suppose you dumped him after those 3 days were over,
Eli remarked warily. Of course. I told him I was too exhausted to date him anymore. Everyone at the table burst into raucous laughter, except for Carter. He stared glumly at his plate as he speared his lamb with a fork.
This meat is overdone, Kingston,
he said.
I like my lamb to have a palpable pulse.
The laughter died away. The table fell silent. I think it's delicious, I piped up.
Of course you do. You're a regular Little Mary Sunshine,
Carter sneered. I was glad he was sitting on the other end of the table, too far away to see my fiery cheeks. I had never thought of myself as the kind of girl who gave off positive vibrations. Not with my dark past. Carter's comment stung. Hey, asshole. Keep your bad attitude to yourself. Olympia shot back.
You're right.
Carter gave a short bow to Kingston, then to me. The gesture was sardonic.
I apologize. I had a rough go of it last night. The meal was fine.
He did have a hard time sleeping, Jose offered. I woke him up with one of my nightmares. That's no excuse. If I acted like a jackass every time I had a hard night, you'd be feeding me hay instead of a rack of lamb. Olympia tossed her golden curls over her shoulder. I would think a hard night would leave you refreshed and rejuvenated, I said. That's how I always feel when I get laid. Everyone went quiet. I was sure I had screwed everything up with that one snarky remark. Then, Olympia reached out and slapped me on the arm. Right on, little sister. You do have a mouth on you. I blushed again, this time with pride. I had never had a sense of belonging anywhere before. Sure, I'd had a couple of foster placements in cozy homes where the parents were kind to me and tried to make me feel welcome. But ultimately, I was always left on the outside looking in. And I was never adopted. After dinner, I went to the library to catch up on my research. I was sitting in front of one of Kingston's giant tomes, a cup of tea on the table beside me, when Carter walked in.
"I'm sorry I was moody at dinner,"
he said. "You were more than moody. You were downright insulting." I turned to the page with my fingertip and took a swig of my tea, not bothering to look at him.
"You're right. Again, I'm sorry. I don't suppose you'd like to train again tonight?"
I gulped, remembering the iron blade slicing my breast open. Eli offered to train me. He's a martial arts expert and a master swordsman. Eli is a real gentleman. I'm sure he'd never cut me with one of his swords. Carter sighed and sat down beside me at the reading table. This time, he maintained a courteous distance.
"I'm sorry about that, too. I got carried away."
You sure did. You're lucky I heal so fast. And so am I. The last thing I need is one more scar. I pointed to the white line on my temple.
"You make a good point. And Eli is an excellent trainer. But he's not as good at slaying demons as I am. And that's what you need to learn to protect yourself."
I closed the book and sat up straight. Okay, I'll train with you tonight. On 2 conditions.
"What are they?"
1, I would like to know what you were doing last night that put you in such a pissy mood. And 2, I want to practice with the iron blade. Only this time, I want to be the one to hold it.
"Fine. I can satisfy both of those conditions. 1, I had to leave in the middle of the night to slay a vampire who turned out to be a half-demon. And 2, I will let you practice with the blade this time. Do we have a deal?"
I hadn't expected Carter to agree so quickly. I thought we'd wrangle a bit, like before. I was starting to enjoy those verbal tussles. My hopes were deflated when he gave in so easily. If slaying demons put you in such a bad mood, maybe I don't want to do it, I said.
"At this point, you don't have a choice."
He glowered at me.
"You have demons all around you. When I drove back to the warehouse last night, I saw 3 of them huddled on the doorstep. They were minor succubi, no serious threat. But they're just the beginning. The word has gotten out, so to speak, and your powers are in demand."
A bolt of fear shot up my spine. What do they want from me? If the world is full of demons hanging around behind the scenes, why are so many of them looking for me?
You have more power than you think. The telekinesis, the rapid healing. They're early signs that your gifts are developing. It's the spiritual equivalent of pubescence.
I'm becoming a full-blown freak, in other words.
No. You're gaining strength, stepping into your role as a member of the supernatural realm. That's a delicate time for you. You could go either way, towards good or towards evil. The Venandi want you to follow the side of good. That's why we're supporting you here. Those demons outside want you to align with them.
So, they're trying to recruit me? Like the military? Carter smiled, but his face held no humor.
Like the military, yes. They are an army. But I wouldn't call it recruitment. They will engulf you, ensnare you. They will deceive you into thinking that they want what's best for you by appealing to your weaknesses. Once you're in their thrall, they will hold you in their service for the rest of your life.
I tilted my head and studied him. I had never heard Carter sound so gruff. I had to admit, he did look haggard. His eyes and cheeks were sunken, and I noticed a dark bruise along his jaw. Whoever, or whatever he had been fighting, had almost gotten the best of him. "Then we'd better get started with the training," I said. Carter followed through on his promise to let me hold the iron blade. As I held it in my hands, I could swear I felt a surge of energy coursing through the metal, as if it had been charged with electricity. "Did you use this blade last night?" I asked.
Yes.
Carter shot me a look that told me not to push my luck. Instead of offering himself as a victim for me to practice on, Carter pulled out a burlap dummy stuffed with straw. A red X marked the place on the dummy that would have held a human heart. The dummy also had X's for eyes, but no other features to make it more relatable. Somehow, this crude replica creeped me out more than a lifelike mannequin would have. The burlap man looked like an effigy that might have been burned in a sacrifice thousands of years ago at some pagan ceremony. Carter held the body out in front of him like a shield.
I'll hold the dummy. You follow me and try to track its heart with the blade. Stab the red X, and you win a prize.
What prize? I was going for flirty with that little query, but it didn't work.
You get to live.
I thought it would be easy to pierce the 12-inch blade through Strawman's heart, but the way Carter bobbed and wove and feigned, I couldn't get close to it. He was quicker and more agile than I expected him to be after a long and exhausting night.
Faster! He barked. You're not keeping up. Don't look away from the X, or you might as well be dead.
I decided that the smartest approach would be to let Carter wear himself out, bouncing around with that creepy thing. Then grab it away from him, throw it to the ground, and jab it in the heart. Finally, Carter backed off, letting the dummy sag. He took a moment to catch his breath. That's when I made a leap for Strawman. But Carter did something that shocked the hell out of me. He rose from the floor and hovered about a foot above the ground. I saw him pull back, and I jumped out of the way just before he threw the dummy in my direction. It landed on the padded floor like a sack of potatoes. The thing was heavier than it looked. It could have hurt me. What the fuck? I was pissed. Carter seemed intent on trying to injure me in one way or another, and I couldn't figure out why. Was he still trying to test my healing powers, or was he just being a jerk? Maybe a little of both. Here you go. Take that, bastard. I jumped on Strawman, clutching his torso between my thighs, and jabbed the red X with all my strength. It felt so good to sink that iron rod into his chest that I stabbed him again and again, until shreds of his straw innards littered the floor. His featureless face became every male who had ever hurt me, physically or emotionally. I saw a string of foster dads, uncaring social workers, and romantic con artists. I saw Adam showing up at the hospital to offer me a ride so that I wouldn't find out he'd been fucking my roommate while I was in a coma.
Enough! That's enough!
Carter shouted. The blood had drained from his face, leaving his cheeks a chalky gray. Sweaty and wild, I glared at him. You told me to kill it. I thought that was the point.
I told you to stab the red X, not to eviscerate the thing.
I threw the blade down on the floor, got up, and brushed the straw off my legs. You told me to kill it, and I did. Something about my violence toward the dummy had shaken him to the core.
No, you were completely out of control. You can never lose control around a demon. You'd call down a whole host of them with an attack like that.
He kicked at the loose straw on the floor.
And you made a mess in the process. Look at all this shit.
Fine, I'll go get a broom. I'm sure Olympia will have one I can use, if she's not out flying around on it. I stalked away from Carter, leaving him to his tantrum. I'd had enough of training, and enough of his moodiness. Last night, he'd been a debonair flirt. Tonight, he was apparently in full menopause. As I left the room, a pair of swords flew off the wall. Their blades clanged as they met in midair before clattering to the ground. A rack of dumbbells toppled over. The knotted ropes swung wildly. The whole scene was disturbing, but deeply satisfying. For once in my life, I had released the pressure valve on my rage. And for once, I did not feel like a freak.
I don't know what Carter's problem is. Just take my advice. Never work too hard to get into a man's head. It's like kicking your way into a closet and finding nothing but mothballs and a couple of old porn magazines.
Our hysterical laughter rang through the industrial-sized kitchen. Olympia poured another slug of cognac into my tumbler. We had already knocked over half of a 200-year-old bottle of the stuff, and I was ready for more. As the whiskey burned its way down my throat, the liquor burned away the hurt that I felt after Carter shouted at me. So, is that straw dummy a family treasure or something? The way Carter pitched a fit over that thing, I thought I might have destroyed a priceless heirloom of the Venandi tribe.
Not that I know of. I've never seen it. Of course, I wasn't trained like the others. I don't do martial arts. My specialties are potions, spells, and power charms. Of course, if I have to, I can turn into a guinea pig. But I only do that in dire emergencies.
We laughed again, this time so hard that we both started crying. What do you really think of all this supernatural shit that the Venandi do? I asked when we had finally calmed down. Are their powers a bunch of random testosterone? Or are they real? Olympia was sober. Or sober enough to stop laughing.
Real enough to save my life.
Seriously?
Yes. That's how I ended up on the team. I had a familiar, a black dog named Ceres, whom I loved with all my heart. He was a monster of a dog, a huge, slobbery beast who would do anything I asked. Whenever anyone threatened me, he would turn into a dragon from hell.
What happened to him? I felt sober now, too. I hated any kind of animal cruelty. And I didn't know if I could bear to hear that Ceres had been hurt.
A succubus took over his soul. She hated me, but more than that, she wanted Ceres. Demons, as well as witches, highly value loyal familiars. One day, I came home and found my loyal familiar crouched on the rug in the kitchen. He was frothing at the mouth, and his eyes had turned a furious red, like two fireballs. He was growling deep in his throat, and I knew he was going to jump me.
What stopped him?
Eli and Carter. Eli isn't psychic, but he knew something was going to go down when he stopped by my house to drop off a flyer from the gym where he worked. Ceres met him at the door and almost disemboweled him. On the day Ceres tried to attack me, Eli sensed that I was in danger. He brought Carter with him for supernatural backup.
What happened to the dog?
They turned him into a beautiful red mist.
Olympia said gently.
It had to happen, Georgia. The succubus had taken over his body and soul. The dog I loved was never going to come back.
How did you know Eli and Carter?
I had met Eli a few months before, when he was teaching self-defense classes at the YMCA. I wanted to learn a few techniques that I could use on handsy guys at the bars. So, I took a class from him. We went on a couple of dates, but we knew it wasn't going to work out. I love Eli like a brother, but I wasn't going to commit to him as a boyfriend. I just wanted his smokin' hot bod.
We shrieked with laughter again.
Hey there, girls. Whatever is in those glasses must be totally hilarious.
Eli appeared at the refrigerator. He rummaged through its shelves and drawers, searching for a snack. Olympia held the bottle of cognac aloft.
Cheers, she said. You know, I just told Georgia that you weren't psychic, and here you are turning me into a liar. My ears were burning, Eli said. He emerged from the fridge with an armful of cold cuts, cheese, and veggies. If you had a little hair on your head, you wouldn't have felt it, Olympia said. Eli ran his palm across his clean-shaven skull. I agree, but I wouldn't be as sexy with hair. Girls like bald men, as long as it comes from a razor and not from male pattern baldness.
Olympia and I wailed with laughter again. Eli joined us, but not at such a hysterical pitch.
If I were a drinking man, I'd join you for some of that cognac, he said. As it is, I'll have to be satisfied with a sandwich. Could I interest you girls in a snack?
Soon, we were all sitting on bar stools at the kitchen counter, with heaping sandwiches in front of us. Jose padded into the room on his bare feet and slid onto a stool to join us. My abs ached from laughing, but I managed to stuff a sandwich down in spite of the pain. I hadn't eaten so much, laughed so much, or felt so much genuine affection surrounding me for as long as I could remember. This must be how it felt to have a family, if a family consisted of people who accepted you for who you were. When our conversation died down, I turned to Jose. What did you dream about last night? Sounds like it was a doozy of a nightmare. Jose nodded. It was terrible. I woke up screaming, and that woke up Carter. He sleeps in the room next to mine, in case I have a bad dream. My dreams are so intense They're more like night terrors. I hated to admit it, but Carter's protective attitude towards Jose touched me deeply.
Go on. Tell us what you dreamed about.
I dreamed about a man being stalked by a woman with spiky hair and long nails. Jose said. He couldn't get away from her. She was going to kill him. When Carter woke me up, I had just dreamed that she dragged him into an alley. There was a big clock with green numbers on the wall of the building that helped us figure out the time. Turns out the murder hadn't happened yet. Carter got there and stopped it. He told me about it this morning.
Wow. Carter has a lot of guts breaking into a scene like that.
Eli said.
I'm surprised he didn't wake me up to go with him.
The woman in the dream was someone he used to know. Someone like him. He didn't tell me that out loud, but I heard it in his head. Someone like him. Hadn't Carter told me that he'd been out last night killing a creature who was half demon, half vampire? Did you see the woman in your dream, Jose? I asked. He shuddered. Oh, yeah. She was sexy and scary at the same time. I was worried about Carter going to find her, but I knew we needed to save the guy. She was going to rip his heart out and suck all his blood. I saw her kill him, but Carter kept it from happening.
Next time that happens, wake me up too. Okay, buddy?
Eli said.
I don't want Carter slaying alone if I can help it.
Neither did I realized. Especially if he was sneaking out of the training center to meet sexy vampires. My hand drifted up to touch the spot on my left breast. The spot that would have been a scar on a normal woman. My suspicions about that incident came rushing back. I was pretty sure I'd figured out what Carter was. That night, as I lay in bed in the guest room at the training center, I watched the sky outside the warehouse window. An enormous full moon illuminated fathoms of shifting clouds, whose depths hid hordes of flying creatures. I saw their wings darken the sky as they swirled overhead with their beating wings. Faces of demonic beings appeared in the moonlight, then vanished. Carter was right. I was being watched. Not just when I walked down the street or drove my car to work. These beings were observing me constantly, waiting. As soon as I let my guard down or left the protection of the Venandi, they would strike. I pulled the covers over my head and turned away from the window. I curled up against a pillow, cradling its softness the way I had when I was a little girl, scared and alone.